So is it any wonder people are afraid of technology?
Technology!
Warning, spoilers for Scorn. Ads.
Deformed people, baby juice machines, Giga-esque love statues, an artificial afterlife? Why does it hurt when I stick my fist into this hole? What does it all mean? I have the answers. Car crash fetishists, Eros and Thanatos, transhumanism, Sigmund Freud, death and our relationship to it. Goal videos, head death salmon philosophy, the JFK assassination, and this Nazi. Do all these topics mean anything to you and your understanding of scorn? Yup. Giga and Beksinski, life and death drives, pleasure and pain, flesh and technology. These are all concepts and things that help us understand the meaning, story, and world of Ebb Software's first-person puzzle art game, Scorn. I believe it's in analysing Scorn's extensive list of influences, philosophers, psychologists, artists, and so on, that the true meaning and intent behind the game can be revealed, brought forth, unconcealed. Speaking of, Heidegger was a philosopher and Nazi renowned for his contributions to phenomenology and existentialism, being incredibly hard to understand and a bit of a technophobe, but not really. In his first book, Being and Time, Heidegger sets out to explain the meaning of being. And for Heidegger, the meaning of being isn't cogito ergo sum or the allegory of the cave, it's simply being there, just you being there in the universe or world. He uses the German word Dasein for this concept, and what constitutes being is time, because time is what makes up your being there. It marks your birth and death and everything in between. Are you following me so far? Heidegger also states that our Dasein is shaped by our culture and the trends of the time period. He uses the word thrownness to convey how we are thrown into existence. We are born, and then culture or society influences our design, which can lead to inauthenticity, which is living an inauthentic existence/design. And Heidegger believes we should return to our authentic design by questioning cultural standards and contemplating death. Of course, death marking the end of our time, and of course our being there in the world. Briefly, another Heideggerian concept present in Scorn is present at hand and ready at hand, which are terms used to describe how objects appear to us in the world. For example, when using a hammer, when a hammer is operational and functional, doing what it's intended for, the hammer becomes ready at hand. The hammer disappears from consciousness. We don't think about the hammer when using it. But when the hammer breaks and becomes unusable, the hammer becomes present at hand, meaning the hammer is now fully in our consciousness, its components laid out before us. Now, for the rest of this video, I'm going to hammer home the point that almost everything in Scorn, the buildings, the weapons, the people, the main characters, are all tools. But as you can plainly see, this world is and so almost everything in Scorn is present at hand, because everything is a tool and the world is also decaying. It's a wasteland. So this is all cool and interesting, and we can see these ideas here and there in Scorn, but what I want to focus on in this video is Heidegger's ideas after Being and Time, primarily the ones in his book, The Question Concerning Technology. In it, Heidegger aims to understand the essence of technology. He argues that the ancients, which we will say is all of human history before modern technology of the late 20th and 21st century, considered technology as a way of revealing what is concealed in material and nature. For example, a craftsman unconcealing and revealing a chalice out of a lump of metal or the bark of a tree. He also states that the ancients had a sort of symbiotic type of relationship with nature and the world, where we worked alongside it, or rather around it, and we weren't the masters of it. For example, a farmer dealing with weather conditions/seasons, or how a windmill is only functional when it's windy. That technology operates alongside nature, but that's then. What about now? What about our modern technology? Heidegger believes modern technology is a new kind of revealing called challenging, meaning all nature and things are viewed as energy to be extracted and stored, making ourselves the masters of nature, viewing everything in the same way and that things wait for us to use them. Heidegger calls this standard reserve, that nature, even ourselves and possibly other people, are resources to be used, optimized and stored. Heidegger calls this viewing of nature as standard reserve as Enframing, and believes it to be potentially dangerous because we view ourselves as the masters of nature and that our truth is that we make things. This quote from the Wisecrack video, "Is technology dangerous?" explains it best. Modern technology is distinct from the technology of the ancient Greeks. They considered technology, or techne, as a way of revealing the potential of the world, as an art or as a craft. It is a way of revealing what is concealed, of seeing a beautiful vase in a lump of clay. Modern technology focuses purely on the utility of an object. It manipulates the environment for the greatest potential output." End quote. Pellett, Software's lead director, the main guy behind Scorn, states in this article that we are being augmented by technology to such a significant degree that most people don't even realise. This isn't hard to see if one takes a closer look at our lives and modern technology. This idea of standard reserve, I firmly believe, is a core concept behind the world of Scorn and understanding what it's all about. If we take our modern and framed world and exacerbate it or add X number of years to our timeline, do we get the world of Scorn? I like to end the segment with a quote from Philosophize This, episode 101, which is on Heidegger and his philosophy. If we're willing to look at the natural world as merely a resource at our disposal, aren't human beings a part of the natural world too? Doesn't this outlook on being go uncomfortably close to treating human beings as merely an exploited resource? Don't we see glimmers of this already when it comes to how some companies view an employee's work and production? Is it that crazy to think that it might one day extend up to human beings as people? Before we continue, I'd like to lay out my thesis statement for this video essay. Firstly, I have to mention that Scorn is a video game designed as an interactive art piece rather than a traditional video game. This means that whatever you take away from the game, whatever you believe to be the story, whatever your interpretations are about everything in the game, are all completely valid. We can see in interviews with lead designer Pellett that he is happy for gamers to believe what they believe the game is about. Even the developers of Software themselves aren't 100% certain about what everything means. Think along the lines of surrealist painters like Jackson Pollock and Salvador Dali, who created art more from the unconscious rather than consciously trying to convey a message or particular meaning. David Lynch, one of Pellett's influences, created his movie Eraserhead in a similar manner, and it wasn't until after the release of his film and upon reading a quote from the Bible that Lynch finally understood the meaning of his work. This is how Software would like players to interpret their art, to come up with your own interpretations from your own experiences and unconscious influences. So, like viewing a piece of art, if you believe that the game is a metaphor about pregnancy and its complications, then you are completely valid. But, as we can see here, Pellett does have a story in mind. This video is an analysis and exploration of the ideas, themes and narrative of Scorn, pulled straight from the source material, the vast array of influences presented in interviews and in the art book, in order to come to an informed, and as accurately as I possibly can, true meaning and interpretation of Scorn. Now, back to my thesis statement. My thesis statement for this video essay is that Scorn depicts a hyperbolic version of our relationship with technology, or a possible future of humanity if we continue along the lines of our current tech-obsessed culture, in particular that of everything in ourselves becoming a resource that I just spoke about, mastery over death through technology, and how all this dramatically alters what it means to be human and to be in the world, our Dasein, and the negative consequences, ramifications, and horrors that will be the subsequent result. Scorn is a transgressive story displaying humanity's relationship with technology to the point where life and death, what is human and what is technology, has gotten so far out of hand that the line is blurred and they are inseparable from one another. Humans create technology, technology creates us. Now, let's continue. Think of the 20th century. What key image sums it up in your mind? If I were asked to condense the whole of the present century into one mental picture, I would pick a familiar, everyday sight: a man in a motor car. Almost every aspect of modern life is there, both good and for ill. Our sense of speed, drama, aggression, the world of advertising and consumer goods, engineering and mass manufacture, and the shared experience of moving together through an elaborately signalled landscape. I think the 20th century reaches its purest expression on the highway. Here we see all too clearly the speed and violence of our age, its strange love affair with the machine and, conceivably, with its own death and destruction. Is the car, in more sense than one, taking us for a ride? The car crash is the most dramatic event in most people's lives, apart from their own deaths, and for many, the two will coincide. Are we victims in a meaningless tragedy, or do these appalling accidents take place with some kind of unconscious collaboration on our part? End of quote. These are some lines from the article Autopia, published in Drive magazine, 1971, by transgressive science fiction author J Ballard. Arguably, Ballard's most transgressive and well-known novel is Crash, which was released in 1973 and later adapted into a movie by Cronenberg in 1996, which both encapsulate the ideas and themes from Autopia. Crash, much like H.R. Giger's art, depicts death, sex, technology, bleak industrial landscapes, machinery combined with flesh, biomechanics. The story centres around a cult of people led by the main antagonist Vaughn, who, after experiencing a catastrophic motorcycle crash and coming out alive, forms a new sexuality around cars in car crash ruins. Quote, Vaughn unfolded for me all his obsessions with the mysterious eroticism of wounds, the perverse logic of blood-soaked instrument panels, seatbelts smeared with excrement, sun visors lined with brain tissue. For Vaughn, each crash set off a tremor of excitement in the complex geometries of dented fender, in the unexpected variations of crushed radiator grills, in the grotesque overhang of an instrument panel forced onto a driver's crotch as if in some calibrated act of machine fellatio. Without spoiling too much of the story, the majority of the novel focuses on main character J Ballard himself in the cult of fetishes, which include Ballard's JF, and Vaughn as they go about day to day using each other both sexually and violently, typically within an automobile, and also against innocent civilians in the odd celebrity, with description after description of how the human body mimics and merges with the car. These themes of the human body combined with technology and also our sexuality is seen throughout Scorn, but this isn't the only theme Crash shares with Scorn. In both Ballard's and Cronenberg's versions of Crash, there is a distinct amorality, loneliness, bleakness, and alienation from humanity. The moral consequences of killing people in car crashes for sexual gratification and so on are almost entirely absent, and any strong moral feelings expressed by their characters are quickly forgotten about or played down entirely. In my opinion, This mirrors Heidegger's view of stand and reserve. To me, the constant language used of comparing man to machine in Crash demonstrates how the characters view themselves and each other as tools/technology. Like cars, they can be used, modified, and discarded. People are a resource for their perverse and brutal sexuality. Author Zadie Smith describes Crash as an existential book about how everybody uses everything, how everything uses everybody. And in the introduction of my copy of Crash, Zadie writes, "The distinction between humans and things has become too small to be meaningful, and in fact, things are using things." Now, doesn't that sound familiar? Prior to the creation of Crash, Ballard had a hypothesis that cars and sexuality were unconsciously linked. He staged an exhibition at the Art Laboratory in London, displaying wrecked cars and one naked model to interview the guests. The exhibition ended in drunken debauchery and affirmed Ballard's thesis, or as Travis Elborough puts it, the evening, which descended into drunken mayhem, seemed to confirm his thesis only too well, and he set about writing the novel in 1970. Ballard was also disturbed by the trend of the spectacle of celebrity deaths associated with cars, like the JFK assassination, describing how people were obsessed with watching the footage again and again on TV. And this was a primary influence on Crash, going as far as making Vaughn drive the very make of car JFK was assassinated in, and making the members of his cult devise plans to fatally crash into a celebrity of their choice. Drawing your mind back to the intro quote, Ballard states, "Is the car, in more sense than one, taking us for a ride?" Here, I believe he's not just picking up on Heidegger's ideas, but how our unconscious impulses can be unleashed through technology. The car becomes a vehicle for the drives of the human mind, sex and death. Unconsciously, technology becomes a tool that reveals to us our primal id desires, our need to make love and to enact violence. These drives are always within us, and even though we repress them to fit into society, they can be revealed and unleashed through technology. One modern example of this, which is reminiscent of the JFK assassination Ballard mentioned, is the popularity of gore and torture videos in sites like LiveLeak and Bestgore. Despite that they ruin our day and possibly traumatize us, many people have a morbid curiosity to find out content like ISIS or cartel beheading videos and so on. There are many YouTubers that cover said videos, and in the comments of these channels, you find accounts warning others not to view such videos. But you also have accounts, particularly those suffering from depression and PTSD, that explain they view these videos to finally feel something, to help with anhedonia, or to help with abuse in childhood by reliving trauma, or as a form of SH. I wonder what it could be in the human psyche that makes us seek out these dark things, to harm and traumatize ourselves, to ruin our day. Every time we take a shower, it pops into our minds. I wonder what it could... When I started discovering art, Giger was a big inspiration. His paintings were very close to my own sensibility and ideas. Alien is the reason why most people think Giger's work is only about, well, aliens, or something alien to us. But this is a very superficial way of looking at it. It's not about something alien, it's much more about alienation. It's about the processes in our mind that move and frighten us as biological creatures, like our sexual drive or the drive for self-destruction. It's about the truth of our existence, not some other form's existence. That's what people are subconsciously reacting to, not the alienness. This is a quote from Pellett on the meaning behind Scorn's main artistic influence, H.R. Giger, and how his art depicts alienation in the processes in our mind, in particular that of our sexual and self-destructive drives, which leads us to Freud. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, you're probably known for being the guy that believed every man wanted to their mother and every woman envied of their father. He believed a lot of crazy stuff, and one of these beliefs was his idea of the psychological drives. He believed everybody has a life and death drive, Eros and Thanatos, named after the Greek gods of love and death, that unconsciously influence our lives, our actions, moods, and even our art and creative pursuits. The main components of these drives are Eros, sex, social cooperation, survival, and Thanatos, aggression, self-destructive behaviour, reliving trauma. Like I mentioned in the previous chapter, self-destructive behaviour and reliving trauma can be seen in people viewing gore videos, or as Ballard observed, car crashes and celebrity deaths. Scorn wasn't made to be a H.R. Giger Watson simulator. His art depicting Eros and Thanatos, mixed with the influence of technology, the rapidly evolving technology of the late 20th century and the consequences it has had on humanity, is why Ebb Software draw heavily from him. In this article by Stan Groff, he explains how H.R. Giger's artwork represented the 20th century, its need for escapism, annihilation, and the shadow side of the sexual revolution. Stating modern life and its demands, stresses, alienation, and lack of deeper spiritual meaning engendered in many people a consuming need to escape and seek pleasure in oblivion." End quote. And the sex work, child exploitation, teenage pregnancy, sex slave markets, and the AIDS pandemic forge an inseparable link between sexuality and death, Eros and Thanatos. End quote. With this information in mind, if Giger was indeed representing the 20th century and the relationship between psychological drives and technology, if Ballard was representing Eros and Thanatos through the automobile, then Pellett is doing the same but in the 21st century, or rather the modern day, and also beyond that. Giger and Ballard all show our modern condition, our psychological drives, and our relationship with technology, but turned up to 11. Pellett is doing the same with Scorn, as we can see by this quote in the art book. It's an extrapolation of our world. We just push it to the limits. Freud heavily inspired the ideas behind a famous anthropologist whose ideas are also paramount to understanding Scorn. The essence of man is really his paradoxical nature, the fact that he is half animal and half symbolic. He is a creature with a mind that soars out to speculate about atoms in infinity, who can place himself imaginatively at a point in space and contemplate bemusedly his own planet. This self-consciousness gives to man literally the status of a small god in nature. Yet, at the same time, man is a worm and food for worms. His body is a material, fleshy casing that is alien to him in many ways. The strangest and most repugnant way being that it aches and bleeds and will decay and die. Man is literally split in two. He has an awareness of his own splendid uniqueness, and yet he goes back into the ground a few feet in order blindly and dumbly to rot and disappear forever. End quote. Ernest Becker was a cultural anthropologist, most renowned for his award-winning book, The Denial of Death. Quoting straight from the synopsis, The Denial of Death is Ernest Becker's brilliant and impassioned answer to the why of human existence. In bold contrast to the predominant Freudian school of thought, Becker tackles the problem of the vital lie, man's refusal to acknowledge his own mortality. The book argues that human civilization is a defense against the knowing that we are mortal beings. Becker states that humans live in both the physical world and the symbolical world of meaning, which is where our immortality project resides. We create in order to become immortal, to become part of something we believe will last forever. In this way, we hope to give our lives meaning. Basically, all human activity, behaviour, culture, civilization and so on is a defense mechanism against death and to make ourselves seem significant in the universe, above nature and animals, our immortality project, despite knowing that, like animals, we defecate just the same and will decay and die. referring to us as worm food when we pass on and viewing ourselves as gods with anuses. This focus on the fragility of the body, the disdain for our decaying vessels and the need to defend ourselves against death through activity and civilization, to view ourselves as little gods or heroes, is a central theme to Scorn, particularly of the higher class of inhabitants who used to reside in the area called Polis at the end of the game. The inhabitants of Polis have successfully eliminated this fear about death, the scorn for their decaying bodies, the knowing of their demise, like Becker puts it, to know that one is food for worms, by their use of technology to transfer their consciousness to shells, something akin to a robot that can house and be operated by different consciousnesses. A common question in YouTube comments and forums is why call the game Scorn, and I firmly believe everything I have mentioned so far in this video is why. The inhabitants of Scorn have scorn for their flesh and mortality. The inhabitants of Scorn have scorn for viewing themselves as standing reserves, objects present at hand, merely resources to be used. The inhabitants of Scorn unconsciously inflict pain on themselves and others with the use of technology due to the psychological drive Thanatos. How do they overcome this scorn? Transhumanism, technology, to become immortal through it. Transhumanism is the belief or theory that the human race can evolve beyond its current physical and mental limitations, especially by means of science and technology. Anti-aging, immortality, and the transferring of consciousness to enhance or alter said consciousness are all examples of transhumanism. Think along the lines of uploading your mind to a computer chip, cyborgs, and so on. We can see some of these ideas by analysing the imagery. Coming back to Freud briefly, the symbolism of Polis is meant to depict Eros and Thanatos, so much so that the whole civilization of Polis is based on this idea. We can see this in the copulating statues, in the flame machines that attach you to the hive mind. Another major theme symbolised in Polis is loss of control, seen in being restrained by the flame machine, the parasite stopping you from using your limbs and basic functions, and the ecstasy of sex itself. And the last theme is of religion, spirituality, or higher consciousness. For that we have the Doctor resembling a Hindu god, the flayed people who are inspired by Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, believed to be a divine connection between the human form and the universe. The third eyes of the shells, how the characters on the murals are described as seraphim in the art book, and I would even say this light has religious connotations too. Putting all these together, we see the people of Polis wanting to transfer their consciousnesses to a higher being or level, to lose control of their current body and to move to new ones, new evolved, spiritual, unable to feel pain ones, for the use of sensory extremes like pain and sex. I wanted to delve into possible reasons why sensory extremes are used as a method for this, one of which we've already touched on, but this video is getting long and confusing, so I'll post a separate video on my second channel in the future for those interested. But back to the point, to summarise, the inhabitants of Polis wanted to escape the psychological and physical filaments of the flesh by transferring their consciousness to evolved meat robots thanks to the use of sensory extremes, to then disintegrate their flesh in the artificial afterlife and become pure consciousness. Simple, right? But what about the world, technology, and the creatures they left behind? So, this all sounds pretty bad, right? Everybody and thing is a resource. The line between man and technology is no longer existent. A higher class are allowed to become spiritual god beings, whilst others are used to create wallpaper. But what about if this world, governed by all these ideas of standing reserve, immortality projects, Eros and Thanatos, and transhumanism, collapses and falls into ruin due to war and being abandoned by the ruling class, where despite everything decaying, everything left behind is also aiming to continue to live and to transcend death. This is the final element of my analysis. This is why the creator queen perpetually spawns its spawn. This is why the second protagonist stops at nothing to reach Polis. And this is why the parasite / first protagonist apprehends us, uses us, and finally merges with us, aiming to, but in a corrupted and distorted way, to enter a shell and to transcend its form, to do a transhumanism. This explains the bleak ending of the game, and this is where, finally, I didn't forget him, Beksinski influence comes in. His portrayals of vast decaying landscapes and entities rotting in piles is featured as an inspiration throughout Scorn. Like Beksinski's paintings, Scorn's world is a vast decaying wasteland, but it still depicts movement and signs of life. But why was the world left behind to decay for affinity, to become an interactive Beksinski painting? In Jesse I. Bailey's essay Enframing the Flesh, Heidegger, Transhumanism and the Body as Standing Reserve,
Yes, that's right, we've come full circle to Heidegger.
he details how transhumanism will not only lead to seeing ourselves as standing reserve, but also our own flesh, how we can manipulate it and become consumers of identity, and losing the orientation by which we discover the need to wrestle with our finite nature. Going on to say, the struggle plays an important role in human behaviour, and the technologies advocated by transhumanists holds the promise of radically altering our relation to both our embodiment and our mortality." End quote. So, the inhabitants of Polis escape death in the flesh, but because of becoming masters of their own identities, nature and death, their design, their being in the world, is no longer that of a being that engages with nature, death, culture, and so on. They view themselves like the heroes or gods they aspire to be, masters of nature but separate from it, and they have no empathy for the beings left behind because they don't understand what it is to be a being because they have took death out of the equation. Plus the beings left behind are just tools or extraneous resources. What it is to be a being is technology, a resource to be optimized and used, and when a resource is no longer useful, they can be discarded, left behind to rot, thrown in the landfill. Scorn is a video game depicting a future of humanity, their relationship with technology, and the ironic downfall of their society/civilization because of said relationship. Influenced by Martin Heidegger's ideas of enframing and standing reserve, the idea that we view everything, nature, and even ourselves as a resource to be utilised, optimised, and reserved. Freud's ideas of Eros and Thanatos, and their depictions in H.R. Giger's artworks and J Ballard's novels. Ernest Becker's theories on death anxiety and human behaviour/culture. And the nihilism or absurdist words and worlds of Camus, Borges, and Beksinski. Putting all these influences together, we see the ruins of a world predicated on the transcendence of death and flesh through technology, through transhumanism. A world abandoned and ruined, yet kept alive by creatures and beings following the pervading philosophy of using everything as a resource and conquering death with technology, but turned upside down, distorted and malfunctioning. At the end of Scorn, the protagonist combined with the parasite is the biggest horror and warning of Scorn. Two consciousnesses using each other, transcending death but trapped for eternity together, writhing and mutating just at the entrance of freedom from the two main ideas governing the world of Scorn, standing reserve and conquering death, but gone terrifyingly awry. Basically, the main themes of the story, world and meaning of Scorn are 1. Heidegger's ideas of standing reserve/enframing. 2. Ernest Becker's ideas of death denial and heroism. 3. Transhumanism. And finally 4. Dystopianism, a decaying world unable to die due to the previous 3 points governing everything. Thank you for watching my first video. Please leave a like and kiss. Thank you for these cool people.